24 de noviembre de 1326. La Plaza de la Ciudad de Hereford, Inglaterra, s. Rebosante de gente. Nobles en gala. Capas, clerigos agarrando rosarios. Comerciantes, campesinos. Todos ellos. Es reunieron por una razón, para presenciar un momento de brutal justicia pública. Elevándose por encima de la multitud hay una estructura de madera. Plataforma. En su centro, los guardias arrastran un hombre de unos 40 años. Su rostro está veco y pálido. Ha estado muriendo de hambre. Durante días, en un intento desesperado por evitar lo que viene. Su otrora lujoso. La ropa le cuelga en sucios jirones. Hace apenas unos años, este hombre había sido la figura más poderosa de Inglaterra. En honor al propio rey. Hoy está a punto de ser inyectado en uno de las formas más espantosas imaginables. Su nombre es Hugh Despenser el Joven. Favorita real y posible amante de el rey Eduardo II. En cuestión de horas, su cuerpo será destrozado. Aparte frente a una multitud que los vitoreaba. Advertencia para cualquiera que vuele demasiado cerca de poder sin mirarse las espaldas. Pero para entender cómo Hugh terminó en esto andamio, necesitamos rebobinar su ascenso. Su caída es una historia empapada en ambición, yugos de poder, traición y escándalo que sacudió al reino hasta sus cimientos. Núcleo. Hugh Despenser el Joven fue nacido alrededor de 1286. En uno de los más destacados de Inglaterra. Familias nobles. Su padre, Hugh Despenser el Viejo, fue un servidor de confianza del rey Eduardo y su madre, Isabel Beauchamp, era originaria de el poderoso linaje del conde de Warwick. Hugo tenía todas las ventajas de un medieval. Un aristócrata podría sonar con estatus. Educación y acceso a los tribunales. Desde el principio fue criado para servir la corona y asegurar la seguridad de su familia. Influencia. Todo cambió en 1307 cuando Eduardo II se convirtió en rey. Eduardo tenía reputación. Uno que levantó las cejas entre los nobleza. Su profundo afecto por los hombres. Los favoritos no eran ningún secreto. Suprema. El compañero Piers Gaveston provocó indignación en todo el reino. Gaveston no estaba muy cerca de Edward. Era arrogante. Destinoso con la nobleza, parecía para hacer alarde de su poder. La situación estaló en 1312. Los paramos tomaron el asunto en sus manos. Gaveston fue capturado brutalmente ejecutado. Hizo dio un vacío al lado del rey Hugh Despenser estaba listo para intervenir. Por 1316. Hugo había infiltrado en la casa del rey. Círculo íntimo. Fue nombrado miembro real. Chambelán, un papel que le dio acceso privado constante Edward. Su vínculo profundizó rápidamente. Hugh también reforzó su posición al casarse. Eleanor de Clare, la sobrina del rey. A través de ella, obtuvo la exuberancia poderoso senorio de Augen en Gales. A medida que la influencia de Hugo sobre Eduardo crecía. Su apetito por la tierra, por el poder. Para el control. No estaba contento con lo que tenía. Quería más. Gracias al rey. Por favor, podría conseguirlo. Hugo comenzó a explotar su hechizo real. Para apoderarse de propiedades en toda Inglaterra y. Gales, manipuló la ley para confiscar tierras a los rivales, incluso a viudas y sus propios suegros. Él no estaba sutil. No fue justo. Y lo hizo. Enemigos rápidos. En 1321, las cosas ligaron a un punto crítico. Hartos. Con su corrupción y su codicia desenfrenada. Las baronesas se rebelaron. Hugo se vio obligado a exiliarse. Pero incluso luego, se negó a desvanecerse en silencio. Se dedicó a la piratería. Sí, la piratería. Asaltando barcos mercantes ingleses mientras en el extranjero. Pero Hugh no se quedaría fuera por largo. Eduardo II, decidido a aplastar la rebelión, recuperó el control en 1322. Con el rey de nuevo en el poder, Hugo regresó, más poderoso y despiadado que nunca. De 1322 a 1326. Los dispensadores, padre y hijo, no lo hicieron. Solo sirven a la corona, ellos eran los corona. Hugo el Joven controlaba el pushed deeper into Wales, but the walls were closing in. Starved of support. Pursued by an army of enemies, they were finally captured near Neath. The king, once the ruler of a mighty realm, was taken into custody. In a matter of weeks, he would be forced to give up his crown to his 14-year-old son, the future Edward III. But Hugh's fate would be far worse. Knowing what was coming, Hugh tried to escape his fate in the only way left to him. He stopped eating, a slow suicide, hoping to waste away before his enemies could reach him. But it didn't work. By mid-November, still alive, but weak and skeletal, he was dragged back across the border and taken to Hereford. There, on November 24, Hugh stood trial in front of his fiercest enemies. Roger Mortimer, Queen Isabella, and a tribunal of barons who had suffered under his reign. But the trial was nothing more than theater. The outcome had been decided long before he was ever captured. The charges were long and damning. Treason, theft, extortion, manipulation of the king, corruption. The tribunal made sure to dress the whole process up as legal. They wanted this to look like justice, not just revenge. But everyone knew what this really was. Hugh Despenser the Younger was found guilty on all counts, and his sentence was unlike anything England had ever seen. That morning, a massive crowd flooded the market square in Hereford. Everyone wanted to witness the spectacle. This wasn't just an execution. It was a show, a message, and a moment of public catharsis. Isabella was there. So was Mortimer. Nobles, soldiers, townsfolk, people came from miles around. They wanted to see the mighty brought low, and Hugh Despenser was about to be brought very low. First, he was tied to a tall ladder, raised high so all could see. A crown made of nettles was shoved onto his head, mocking the influence he'd once held beside the king. Verses from the Bible were scrolled across his bare skin, denouncing arrogance and evil. Then the torture began. According to chroniclers like Jean Fazat, the executioners cut off Hugh's genitals and threw them into a fire in front of his eyes, a punishment chosen deliberately to symbolize and condemn the alleged sodomy with King Edward. The crowd cheered. Some laughed. Others roared with approval. But it wasn't over. Still alive, Hugh. Was guttet? His abdomen was sliced open. And his entrails were slowly pulled out. Teen burnt. The square echoed with what witnesses called a howl unlike any human sound. It was a sound of agony, of horror, of a man being torn apart while fully conscious. Only after this long torment was Hugh finally hanged, but even then his humiliation wasn't complete. His body was beheaded, then quartered. His limbs were sent to be displayed in cities across the kingdom, public reminders of what happens to those who overreach. His head was placed atop a spike at London's gates, a grim warning to all who passed by. But why such cruelty? Why such theatrical violence? This wasn't just punishment. This was symbolism. Hugh's execution was crafted to be a moral spectacle, an expiation of sins that the people believed had polluted the kingdom. His public castration wasn't just about physical pain. It was about shame, about broadcasting a message. This man violated sacred bonds, corrupted royal power, and defiled the natural order. It was also revenge, sweet and bloody. For the countless nobles, widows, and commoners Hugh had cheated and crushed during his reign. 4 years later, in 1330, Hugh's widow, Eleanor de Clare, received permission to gather what was left of his body and bury it, but by then little remained. A head, a thigh bone, a few scattered fragments. It was a pitiful burial for a man who had once ruled England from behind the throne. As for Edward II, his story didn't end much better. At first, he was held in captivity. But in September 1327, less than a year after Hugh's execution, Edward died at Berkeley Castle under mysterious circumstances. The most persistent and macabre legend is that he was murdered by having a red-hot poker inserted into his rectum, a horrifying method that would leave no visible wounds, but served as a grim reference to his rumored relationship with Hugh. Whether or not that account is true, the symbolism of the tale is telling. Like Hugh, Edward's death was laced with poetic cruelty, designed to humiliate, to erase, and to cleanse the kingdom of what many believed was moral rot. The fall of Hugh Despenser the Younger wasn't just a political collapse. It was a national purge. In the eyes of his enemies, his body had to be mutilated, burnt, skatteret. Not just to destroy the man, but to erase what he represented. His power, his greed, his closeness to the king, his rumored sexuality. For medieval England, that wasn't just scandal. It was a crisis. But here's the twist. The very people who brought him down, Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer, would soon suffer the same fate. Just 4 years after Hugh's grizzly end, the political wheel turned once again. In 1330, the young King Edward III, just 17 years old, seized control of his own crown. Mortimer, who had ruled England through the Queen as a de facto regent, was arrested. Unlike Hugh, he was spared the slow torture, but not the noose. Mortimer was hanged as a traitor. Isabella, once the avenging queen, was removed from power and quietly placed under house arrest. Her glorious revenge had been short-lived. Power in medieval England, it seemed, always came with a ticking clock. And yet, nearly 700 years later, the story of Hugh Despenser still grips the imagination. In a recent poll, he was voted the greatest British villain of the 14th century, outranking even kings and generals. His name shows up in plays, novels, and television dramas, often cast as the perfect archetype of the conniving courtier, ambitious, arrogant, and ultimately doomed. But modern historians tell a more complex story. Yes, Hugh was ruthless. He was greedy. He used his influence over Edward II to amass obscene wealth and crush his rivals. Even in the harsh context of medieval politics, he stood out as a man with few scruples and fewer allies. His actions, like exiling his enemies, stealing lands, and even imprisoning the queen's household, won him enemies at every level of society. But not every accusation hurled at him was rooted in fact. In the 14th century, accusing someone of sodomy was a political weapon. It wasn't necessarily about truth. It was about shame and control. Many historians believe that the charges of homosexuality against Hugh and Edward II were exaggerated or even invented to justify their removal and humiliate them in the public eye. Homophobia in the Middle Ages wasn't just cultural. It was strategic. If you could brand a rival as sexually deviant, you could erase their legacy, devalue their alliances, and rally public Rache. For Hugh and Edward, that rage became their undoing. Their story reveals something deeper about medieval justice. Executions like Hugh's weren't just about punishment. They were performances. Each step of his death, castration, burning, hanging, beheading, was packed with symbolism tailored to strike fear, cleanse sin, and restore a shaken moral order. It wasn't enough to kill the man. The body had to be turned into a message. And that message was loud and clear. This is what happens when someone grabs too much power. This is what happens when someone disrupts the natural hierarchy. This is what happens to those who dare to mix personal desire with political authority. But perhaps the most haunting lesson of Hugh Despenser's story is that these dynamics aren't relics of a forgotten age. Today, we still grapple with the messy entanglement of power and favoritism. We still see the rise and fall of elites. We still watch as powerful people are built up and torn down, often under the weight of their own ambition. And we still live in societies where sexuality, especially when politicized, can be weaponized to discredit and destroy. Hugh's story is shocking, not just because of its brutality, but because of how familiar it feels. He rose fast. He flew too close to the sun. And when he fell, it wasn't just a defeat. It was a spectacle. A lesson carved into flesh. Played out before thousands and echoed for centuries. From a privileged noble boy to the shadow ruler of England, from royal chamberlain to castrated traitor, from a name spoken in awe to one remembered with a shudder. The rise and fall of Hugh Despenser is one of the most violent and revealing chapters in English history. His name may be long buried, his bones scattered, but the story of what he became and what the world did to him remains a chilling reflection of the dark edges of politics, sexuality, and revenge. A story that even today still whispers its warning. Power is never free and history never forgets.